Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How serious are the skirmishes taking place between Indian and Chinese soldiers in Ladakh and Sikkim? And why are they happening? What is the explanation? Those are the two key issues I shall raise today with India's former ambassador to China and the director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, Ashok Kantha. Ambassador Kant, it's increasingly being said that the skirmishes happening between Indian and Chinese soldiers in Sikkim and Ladakh are much more serious than the sort of things that we've seen in the past annually in the summer months. Would you agree this is more serious?
Yes, no, I agree that it's more serious. We do have standoff situations occurring along India-China borders from time to time. It's partly because, two sides have intensified the patrolling, the open space available has shrunk. But in this case, we have seen, greater aggression on the part of Chinese side. We have seen, aggression leading to injuries on both sides. And there are other reasons why I believe that these incursions and the ongoing standoff are more serious in character compared to routine occurrences along the border areas seen in the past.
Let's then start by discussing the seriousness of this matter. First of all, these clashes are not confined to a small area, nor are they taking place in just one location. In fact, I believe they're taking place in 4 separate locations, some people say even 5. Does that suggest that several different brigades and divisions of the Chinese army is involved and that behind it there must be some form of central coordination?
Going by information that is available in the public domain, what we have seen in media reports, these are not localized or isolated incidents. Clearly, there's a pattern behind them. Clearly, there is some central guidance being given from Chinese side, and that makes us, take note of the gravity, the seriousness of these incidents.
Now, the second striking feature is, as you mentioned a moment ago, the aggressiveness that the Chinese are showing. Today's papers suggest, according to the Economic Times, that some 5,000 Chinese troops are present or involved. The Business Standard says 10,000. It said that these troops have entered 2 or 3 kilometers into Indian territory in the Galwan River Valley area, and satellite images suggest that they've erected anything up to 100 tents, as well as constructed bunkers. And on the Chinese side, there is signs of heavy equipment. Some have even talked of artillery guns, certainly heavy vehicles. Doesn't all of that suggest that they are planning to stay a while?
Yes, I mean, what you mentioned just now, though, in terms of presence of large number of troops on the Chinese side, the fact that they moved into an area, Galwan River Valley, where we didn't anticipate differences on alignment of the LAC, and that they have pitched tents and dug in. All this suggests that these are not routine standoff situations which take place from time to time and which are resolved mostly through intervention at the level of border commanders. We have a situation which is far more serious in character, and Chinese seem to be expanding their territorial claims, especially in Galwan River Valley, but elsewhere too. What we have seen suggests greater aggression part of Chinese border guarding forces, leading to casualties, in terms of injuries on our side.
While we're talking about developments in the Galwan River Valley, one of the papers today suggested that just as Indian troops had taken the Chinese by surprise in Demchok a little while earlier, this time in the Galwan area, it seems the Chinese have taken us by surprise. Is there a sense in which momentarily our guard was down?
I don't know whether our guard is down or not, but it's a fact that, in the past, going by pattern of behavior on the Chinese side, we had identified some areas where we have dispute along the alignment LAC. And Galwan River Valley was not one of those pockets. So clearly, we didn't anticipate the Chinese side to send troops on our side of the LAC. Now, one thing I would like to say that when it comes to Chinese claim line or their perception of the LAC, it's something on which they have maintained a deliberate ambiguity over the years. That's why, in fact, one of the reasons why we have been pressing them to move towards a common understanding of the LAC, to clarify and confirm the LAC, something that they have resisted. Now, in Galwan River Valley, what we had interpreted as the Chinese claim line or the Chinese personal LAC, clearly they seem to have moved beyond that, going by media reports.
And that's why what's happened in the Galwan River Valley is particularly worrying, because as you pointed out, the Galwan Valley is one area where there was no real dispute between the two sides over where the LAC lies. Virtually, the LAC corresponded with China's claims. China has now crossed over into the Indian side, and this is not just an incursion onto Indian soil, but secondly, this is something we hadn't anticipated. This is something much more serious than the normal transgressions, which are as a result of the fact we have different interpretations of the LAC. Here, it's a direct incursion onto Indian soil.
Yes, I mean, that's in our perception, going by media reports. So one can only go by media reports because there has not been any official pronouncement coming from our side. Going by those reports, they seem to have intruded on our side of the LAC at more than one location. And as you pointed out earlier, these are not short-term patrols which come in and go back. They have sent fairly large number of troops. They have dug in, they have pitched tents. So they seem to be changing facts on the ground, which is a matter of deep concern for us.
So one summing up question about Galwan, this is an instance where the Chinese have knowingly and deliberately intruded into Indian territory. This is not an area where there were previous disputes over where the LAC lay. The Chinese have crossed over onto our side and they've done it deliberately.
That is our perception of the LAC. But as I mentioned, Chinese have deliberately maintained ambiguity about their perception of the LAC. In the past, we have encouraged them to exchange maps on their line of the LAC in the western sector, eastern sector. In fact, there is a formal understanding between two sides that will move towards common understanding of the LAC, that will exchange maps, will clarify and confirm LAC. But this is a process that they have interrupted unilaterally. We exchange maps on the LAC in the middle sector, but they showed maps of the LAC in the western sector, but refrained from exchanging maps. And this has led to a situation where we can only second guess their perception of the LAC. They have, as I mentioned earlier, maintained ambiguity on this issue.
Now, in the Galwan Valley area, as we've discussed, the Chinese have intruded and occupied and are still, as we talk, in occupation of some Indian territory, and they've done that deliberately. In the Pangong Lake area, we've seen skirmishes or clashes that have led to a fairly high number of injuries. Newspaper reports say that 72 Indian soldiers were injured and they had to be apparently airlifted to hospitals in Leh, Chandimandir and Delhi, which suggests that the injuries were substantial.
There are known differences on the LAC in Pangong Lake area, both inside the lake and along the northern bank of the lake. But there are pockets where both sides are patrolling, but by and large, these differences are managed in a peaceful manner. What we are witnessing today amounts to Chinese, deploying fairly large number of troops. They're hindering patrolling on our side and also engaging in aggressive behavior, which has led to fairly large number of injuries on our side, as you just pointed out, according to media reports that we have seen.
Is it normal for such large number of injuries to happen in the Pangong Lake area?
Not at all. This is not at all normal. In fact, standoff situations or patrols coming face to face in Pangong Lake area is a fairly routine occurrence. But as I mentioned earlier, these situations are managed peacefully. They don't result in skirmishes or clashes, as has been the case this time. So this is unusual.
Now, at the moment, everything we know about what is happening, whether it's Pangong Lake, whether it's Nakula and Sikkim, or whether it's the Galwan River Valley, is from media reports. The government, beyond an initial fairly anodyne statement by Anurag Srivastava, the Foreign Affairs spokesman, has actually kept very tightly. Is the silence from the government another sign that this is a rather serious situation?
As you rightly pointed out, there have been very few comments from official spokesperson of Ministry of External Affairs. Mr. Anurag Srivastava did mention that Chinese are hindering regular patrolling by our side. There have been off the record, comments coming from army sources, but I think there is need for greater transparency on our side, as we did in case of Doklam standoff in 2017.
So when you say there's a need for greater transparency, you feel the government should be more open. That would end speculation. It would also end a certain amount of apprehension that's building up.
Yes, as we agreed, this is not a routine situation. We are in midst of a fairly serious, series of incursions and standoff situations, which warrant, deft handling on both sides. There is need for Government of India to share a little bit more about what's happening along India-China border areas, because what's happening, recent developments have led to fair amount of anxiety on our side.
Now, given the size and scale of what is happening, do you believe that the agreed protocols that exist between the two armies can actually resolve the situation? I noticed again from the papers that perhaps as many as 6 meetings have been held between the two commanders locally, but they've led to no solution and no understanding, and the impasse continues. So can those protocols that exist sort it out, or now is there need for either diplomatic intervention or maybe even political intervention?
Let me step back here and just explain that we have a fairly elaborate architecture of dialogue mechanisms to deal with situations that occur along India-China border areas. We will aggregate 1993, 1996, 2005, 2012, 2013, and these provide for engagement at the level of border guarding forces, at the level of border commanders, but also we have mechanisms like WMC, that is, there's a consultative mechanism for coordination and cooperation on India-China border affairs. Now, so far, from what we have seen in public domain, there have been several engagements at the level of border commanders, which have not been entirely successful in managing the current situation. I believe there is need for greater engagement at the level of at the diplomatic level. Perhaps diplomatic mechanisms have already been activated. We are not aware of that. But if you look at what happened in case of earlier serious standoff situations in 2013, in Depsang, in 2014, in Chumar and Demchok, in 2017, in Doklam, in all those cases, we had to raise the level of dialogue to the diplomatic level and finally find solution at that level. I expect that in this case as well, there is need for greater engagement at the diplomatic level.
One more question before I take a break. The Indian Army on Sunday has denied that any Indian soldiers were detained, and that word is a euphemism for arrested by the Chinese. They've denied it. But what is well known is that there are substantial troop reinforcements taking place from both sides. And it's also well known that the Indians are patrolling in dozens, but apparently the Chinese are patrolling in hundreds. Are you worried that there is a potential here for worrisome escalation?
No, definitely. There's a potential for escalation. What has happened that Chinese are not quite abiding by agreed protocols. When our troops come face to face, we have laid down how they are supposed to behave. They're supposed to disengage, go back to their respective bases, not pursue each other. That doesn't seem to be happening this time. Chinese have dug in, they're not going back to their base. And this is definitely a worrisome situation, and especially the fact that there have been skirmishes resulting in injuries on both sides, which again is not a normal occurrence. Now, we have armed personnel on both sides. We have a happy situation that since 1975, there has not been any exchange of fire between troops of India and China, resulting in loss of life. This is a situation we would like to maintain, but there can be accidents occurring in the border areas. So it's very important that we terminate the current standoff as early as possible.
Let's take a break at that point, Ambassador Kantha. When I come back, I want to ask that second critical question. Why is this happening? What is the explanation? Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is India's former ambassador to China and the director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, Ashok Kantha. Ambassador Kantha, let's now ask the question, why are these skirmishes and clashes happening? First, there's a view put across by former Foreign Secretary Shyam Saran in an interview to the Times of India, where he says that the incidents at Naku La in Sikkim as well as Pangong Lake are not unusual. He says those are a result of the fact that both countries have different perceptions of where the LAC lies, and these can therefore be easily resolved. Do you believe that, or do you think this time around the two skirmishes have gone a bit further than that?
No, as I mentioned earlier, we do have incidents taking place along Pangong Lake where there are different perceptions of the LAC. In northern Sikkim as well, even though we agree on the basic alignment of the LAC and boundary, that it's along the highest watershed in the area, there are different interpretations of the watershed boundary or LAC, which leads to occasional incidents. But I believe what's happening this time is more serious in character. Ordinarily, as I mentioned, we don't have skirmishes taking place. Chinese have brought in large number of troops on their side. They are hindering patrolling on our side. These are all unusual occurrences. So I would not like to describe what's happening in Pangong and Nakula as something routine in character. This is something far more serious in nature.
Now, perhaps the most worrying incursions and skirmishes are those that are happening in the Galwan River Valley, and there have been at least 4. By some count, there are in fact said to be 5 or 6. Many people say these are prompted by the fact that India has just completed the 255-kilometer Darbukh-Shyok-Daulat big only road, and now we are developing the feeder roads, and the Chinese want to stop it happening because if it does successfully complete, they will lose the advantage they've had of better infrastructure. Is that an adequate explanation for what's happening in the Galwan area, or is that a mistaken one?
I will not say that this is an adequate explanation, but this could be one of the motives on the Chinese side. In fact, perhaps there are multiple motives on our Chinese side. Given the opacity of the Chinese system, we can only speculate. Chinese have in the past also tried to prevent development of infrastructure on our side of the boundary or LAC. They have first movers advantage. There is a definite asymmetry when it comes to border infrastructure with superiority on the Chinese side. We have tried to bridge that gap, and Chinese have tried to discourage us from doing that. In this case also, I believe that apart from Darbukh-Shyok-Daulat alignment, there are some feeder roads being developed to which Chinese are taking exception, according to media report. I can only go by media report. So this could be one of the considerations Chinese side, but there are other considerations as well that we can discuss.
Very quickly, what are these other considerations?
I believe that there is a pattern of behavior on the Chinese side where they are pursuing their contested territorial claims, whether it be in South China Sea or along India-China border areas, in a more assertive, in a more aggressive manner. That's one. A second possible motivation on Chinese side could be to use activation of India-China borders as a way of pressure tactics, to send signals to India, encourage India to show greater deference to their sensitivities and concerns, whether with regard to issues in India-China bilateral relations or with regard to developments like COVID or demand for China's accountability vis-a-vis outbreak of COVID pandemic to be established. On all those issues, there could be some signaling, some messaging taking place from Chinese side that they can use developments along the border areas as a way of pressurizing India to be more mindful of their concerns.
So here you agree with what Shyam Saran said to the Times of India, because he too, like you, said that these could be warning shots to India. A, not to join the United States-led chorus against the Chinese handling of coronavirus. Secondly, to stop India encouraging or facilitating observer status for Taiwan at the World Health Organization. And thirdly, perhaps even a message to India, don't trample on Chinese economic interests in terms of closing the automatic route for Chinese investment in India. So these may not just be territorial aggression for the sake of territorial aggression, but using territorial incursion as a way of sending a bigger political message to India.
I believe it could be a mix of all these considerations, pursuit of territorial claims, which are at times expanded, as seems to be happening in case of Galwan River Valley, or signaling to India that don't pursue your border infrastructure development, or signaling that take into account our concerns with regard to bilateral issues, as also on issues like COVID-19. It could be a mix of all. Let me add there that we can only speculate on this, because Chinese system being what it is, kind of opaque system they have, they're not telling us what exactly is motivating them, what are the factors behind their actions on the ground.
But then where does all of this leave the Modi-Xi Jinping talks? In Bishkek, in Mahabalipuram, we in India drew a certain amount of comfort and reassurance from those talks. Was that premature, or was it just not long lasting?
Informal summit meetings between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi have definitely been useful. These meetings have served to keep relations on even keel, but at the same time, the fact remains that we have a complex relationship with China, with a whole lot of outstanding issues that need to be managed. And perhaps it's not enough to manage those issues. We need to start resolving those issues, at least incrementally, including issues with regard to India-China border areas.
In other words, managing them is not enough. We need to move that one step forward and start resolving them.
If we don't do that, we'll run into this cycle of of ups and downs in relationship that we have witnessed in recent years. So
now,
we need to change the basic paradigm of the relationship, where we have learned to live with outstanding issues even while those kind of fester on. I think festering problems do come back to haunt us from time to time.
Let me at this point put you two arguments that lead people to believe that China in 2020 will not behave like China did in 1962. First, in 2020, China aspires for great power recognition, and a border conflict with India could damage its carefully crafted global image. Would that be a restraining factor, or are we seeing too much into that?
Well, let me first of all, suggest that 2020 is most different from what we had in 1962, in terms of kind of China we had, kind of India we had, and also status of India-China relations. So let's not look at 2020 in light of what happened in 1962. But at the same time, we should not take undue comfort in the fact that China, in its pursuit of great power ambitions, will necessarily be more responsive to reputation it has. It is willing to take certain reputational damage, as you have seen in South China Sea, where China has aggressively pursued its interests, even though it has caused anxieties all around. It has engaged in lateral action. It has created facts on the ground, even though it has led to fairly widespread concerns about Chinese power. So it's willing to take that risk in pursuit of its core and non-core interests.
The second perceived restraint on China is said to be the backlash it faces today internationally for its handling of the COVID virus crisis. As you know, embarrassing questions are being asked about the moral core, the moral nature and stature of the Chinese state. Would a border conflict with India enhance and add greater force and potency to these moral questions, or would China simply not care?
First, I'm not suggesting that ongoing incidents or recent incursions will result in border conflict in India and China. I believe, both countries have invested a lot in ensuring peace and tranquility in border areas. They have lot to lose if situation goes out of hand. Because maintenance of peace and tranquility in border areas is an essential prerequisite for management of India-China relations in a positive direction. Chinese are aware of that. At the same time, when it comes to managing backlash to what happened in early stages of COVID-19 or subsequent Chinese behavior, the response we have seen from Chinese side is to engage in fairly assertive diplomacy. In fact, something which is being described within China as wolf warrior diplomacy, where Chinese diplomats are being encouraged to push back aggressively. So I will not once again take undue comfort from any consideration on Chinese side that they will hold back because of this ongoing backlash, which is fairly widespread in context of COVID-19.
But in a nutshell, and I'm talking of the first half of your answer, you're reasonably at this moment confident that the situation is not going to develop into a border conflict.
No, I will not rule out accidents happening. When you have large number of troops deployed in close proximity, when you have skirmishes taking place resulting in injuries, there can be incidents in border areas. But these incidents resulting in something on a wider scale in terms of border conflict, hopefully that will not happen.
In which case, my last question, as the former ambassador to China, as the director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, what is your advice to the government?
First, I'll be very reluctant to offer any advice because I'm not privy to facts about ongoing developments. As I mentioned earlier, what we're discussing today is largely based on what has appeared in media. So we really don't have access to authentic facts. Without that, I would not like to venture into giving advice to government. But just on the basis of my past experience, I would say that one, as I mentioned earlier, there's need for greater transparency, as we did in case of Doklam standoff. Two, I think we need to activate both border commanders meeting and diplomatic channels to the fullest possible to try and find solution to standoff situations as early as possible. I presume diplomatic channels have already been activated. When we look for solution, I think it's important that we should insist on restoration of status quo ante, because we would not like Chinese to create new facts on the ground and ensure that the gain from the changed facts on the ground by changing status quo. That should not happen. Finally, I think it's important, while we resolve standoff situation, we need to take a longer term view of why these things are happening. And I think one thing which worries me is growing asymmetry in economic and military capabilities of India and China, growing mismatch in terms of border infrastructure that we have been able to put in place. I think we need to start bridging these gaps as early as possible. We need to invest in deterrence we have vis-a-vis China through a mix of defensive and offensive capabilities so that Chinese is discouraged from engaging or indulging in reckless action on their part.
Ambassador Kantha, thank you very much for speaking so fully and openly. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. My pleasure.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.